Out of sight, out of mind. You found someone new, but I can't change my love the way that you do.
Today we have Al Lupo with us. Al has been with us in the past 3 times. Matter of fact, we're thinking about calling this the Al and Jim Show in the future sometime, but that's...
Have I been here that often? Have I been here that?
He wants money for it.
Because I was just going to say, if it's 4 times, I'm due a lot of money here. I'm glad I showed up.
Anyways, Al, and for you people that don't know, Al is a staff writer for the City Edition, Boston Globe Edition, Boston Globe City Edition.
Weekly.
City Weekly, that's right. And we have him here every so often because we can't
other
get anybody
people
else.
didn't come. Other people failed to show up.
That's right.
Good old Al. He'll go anywhere.
Al, he'll come to any show, right? Matter of fact, we have the second show we ever did, you came. And I remember how that came because at that time we had first started about the West End, and we were up there, and the Charles River Park residents were doing a number on us. And you were there, and I didn't know you were there at the time. And you wrote a column, right? And
Yep.
And they said about, well, if West Enders go back there, it'll become an instant slum, right? They'd go over a teabag or something.
Yeah, right.
And you wrote the column, and we invited you on. And we're going to show a little piece of the beginning of the show. We have a roll.
You've saved this.
We have a roll-in. And I'll say roll-in again because Joe Fortunato says if I don't say roll-in anymore, I'm in deep trouble. So could we have that little bit of that roll-in? This is the very first show we did with me, Al, and Raymond Pepper. And there's Al. Look at him.
You know, I was better looking but fatter. I had more meat on me then. And after that show, I began to decline seriously in health.
Job-wise, too.
Yeah, the job market hasn't looked quite as good since then either.
Yeah.
I hope you don't do that to other people.
Well, we've killed a lot of careers. Gone through a whole bunch of them.
That was a good show. I remember doing that. It was a lot of fun. And Raymond set up the set in here.
Oh, that's right.
Like his father's bar room,
Right,
as I recall.
right.
And it was typical that of my family history that when I did go on cable TV, I'd end up in a bar room.
Right.
Yeah.
And there was, do you want to explain what you remember? Every time I see you, you keep asking me about Raymond. And, you know, the one thing I remember about Raymond was when we set up the sound values, I counted from 10 to 1. Al counted from 10 to 1, and Raymond started. He went 10, 9, 8, and whoever was producing the show at that time stopped him in the middle of it. He said, "Hey, you let them two do it."
Raymond was, and he moved out of state shortly thereafter that. He never recovered from being unable to count below 8.
That's right. Discrimination. Other people have the problem going up.
Yeah, right. Well, Raymond was trained to read Hebrew, so he went from right to left. I thought that was, something.
That's true.
In the West End, a lot of Italian guys could do that.
Well, you had to. I mean, you know, all these...
To find out what store you were going into.
That's right. There was...
You didn't want to end up in a circumcision store instead of a butcher shop.
Wrong butcher shop. We can get ourselves in some serious trouble here.
I think we just did. I think the show's being canceled. So let's wrap up this half hour and get on with it.
You know, when you talk about the West End, right? I like to go back and think about some of those old-time politicians that were there, like George Leary, LeMasney. You know, people when they talk about LeMasney, I don't know, they have this mythical person, and you know that he was this and he was that. He was just an ordinary man, but he was. There were stories about him, and the one I liked best was that. And I didn't live in that time, so this is all hearsay. We do oral history tapings. I'm president of the West End Historical Society, and we do oral history tapings. And what they said there was, you came into the West End, he went up to your house, gave you a key, and took 50 cents from you for membership. And then he'd do anything for you, you know, to keep you were one of his constituents. Everybody in the West End in Ward 5 at that time, I think it was, or Ward 8, I don't remember exactly. The ward has changed like 3 or 4 times. And then when you voted, in those days they voted with a pencil. And when you voted, how they would keep you in line is when you closed the ballot, they give you these hard pencils, hard lead pencils, and when you turned it over, if the mark was in the wrong place, you were out.
He was able to count to within 5 or 6 votes ahead of time how that election would go.
Yeah.
And there was one story told, I don't know if it's true or not, in which his candidate had got 3 less votes than he was supposed to. He won almost unanimously, 3 less votes than he says, I'll find out who they are. And he found out. He also would send people down to the East Boston docks, to the immigration station. And when Jewish immigrants would come in, for example, they had fellows there with signs in Yiddish saying, welcome to America. Martin Lemazny welcomes you to America. Those poor people probably thought he was the president. And Martin Lemazny welcomes you to whatever it was, the Ward 8 Democratic Club and the Hendricks Club.
They might have thought his last name was Martin Lemansky.
Which was all right with it. You know, he did reach out, though. He did what Jesse Jackson always talks about, include rather than exclude. He reached out to Italians, Jews, Lithuanians, which is why he stayed in power longer than a lot of other ward
One of
heroes.
the people on one of these oral history tapes, we had about 75 hours of them, and what they said was, he said anyway, was that the thing about Lemazny, he wouldn't let one group, he was Irish, by the way, maybe somebody, you know, because of the name may or may not. He was Irish, and West End was largely Irish till about 1904, 1905, and then it went largely Jewish and then largely Italian. But through all these changes, Lemazny wouldn't let one group attack another group.
Right.
Okay, he make sure that as long as you voted for him, the only sin to Lemazny was voting Republican or
voting for a Democrat that he didn't back.
They didn't back,
Yeah.
right. And he also had what they called Philippine, what are they, Philippine voters, Filipino West Enders. And he had all these people that were living outside of, when they moved out of the West End, all those boarding houses and everything up there. He had their names on, you know, on those buildings, so that they voted for him even when they weren't in the West End anymore.
Mattress voters.
Yeah.
They would bring them in, they'd sleep on a mattress in a rooming house the night before, and they were registered to vote.
But he called them Philippine, I forgot exactly.
That I
what
didn't
was.
know.
Yeah.
But I do know that I was talking to an old-time North Ender about a half a year ago, and he was reminiscing how he voted 16 times one day in the North End. And he says, I know so-and-so won because I voted 16 times for him.
Sounded like Chicago when Kennedy and Nixon.
Yeah, well, Daley saved that election.
Oh.
Daley did nothing else good in his life, and I think he did a number of good things. That was one good thing he did.
I remember after that they said that there were massive voting irregularities, and one guy voted 6 times and he was dead.
Yeah. The rule was if you were dead, you could vote only once.
Right.
They were very strict about that. Dead people voted once. Live people was a different story.
There was a cartoon in the USA Today just recently. There's a cemetery, and in the middle of the cemetery there's a mailbox. And the guy goes, I didn't know voter registration. Mail registration.
There were a lot of very colorful politicians at that time in Boston, from the late 1800s right up through, I'd say, the 60s, 1960s. And that was true in a number of cities.
Right.
But they started to get a little buttoned down, you know, college educated, graduate school educated. They began looking alike, talking alike. So you know who started some of this? Jack Kennedy, may he rest in peace. With the jacket over the shoulder and the little finger hooked into the jacket.
Right, no hat.
And then you saw guys running for Senate doing it, and then you saw guys running for the U.S. House doing it, and then you began to see state legislative candidates doing it. And when it got down to like cemetery commissioners and tree wardens and dog catchers walking around with it lost a little of its luster.
But the big thing was that in those days, politicians, looked upon their constituents as the way to keep themselves in office. Like Curley, he used to open his door and people would just come through all day. If he was in the office, he just said to people and come through. Nowadays, you call up any politician. Oh, and I don't say any. There are some. Charlie Shannon, usually you can get through to. That's around here. I don't know, but maybe somebody else can't. Like to their senators somewhere else. But you call them now, they're in the field, or he's in a meeting, he'll give you a call back. If they just said he's not going to call you back, I'd feel much better. And I told somebody this once. I said, when we started the West End, we were probably the most politically outcasts of anybody in the world, because I said, there's no way anyway. I got my first phone call back. It was Peter Dreyer from the BRA. It was after 2 years of browbeating people and everything.
In the Flynn administration, yeah.
I picked up the phone. He said, "Hi, this is Peter." I put a call through to the BRA, right? And they said, "Oh, I'll call you back." And, "Hi, this is Peter Dreyer from the BRA." I said, "My God."
Put you in a state of shock and you were unable to talk to him. Yeah, Peter was a good public servant. He's out in California now, but he always cared about places like the West End. He always cared about the history of the city. I can't, put myself in your shoes because I wear a different pair of shoes and have a different view on it. When you call as a reporter, you generally get a call back.
Without a doubt.
And often, though, you might not get a call back as soon as you want, but it's not necessarily that they're avoiding me or any other reporter or columnist. It's often because politics today is a lot more serious than it used to be. It takes a lot more time in terms of the kind of issues they have to deal with. They're dealing with issues today that previous generations of politicians wouldn't have touched. Very complicated issues about gender and race and class and housing subsidies and stuff like that that just never came up years ago. Also, years ago, before the New Deal especially, as you know, you had patronage because that's how it worked. But the New Deal removed a lot of that from local politics.
That's how you survived, really.
And the New Deal built in safety nets so that it was really Washington that was providing the kind of stuff that the Curleys of the world used to provide, which is one reason Curley got angry at Roosevelt.
Judge Leary, you know Judge, right?
I didn't know him. I know of Judge Leary, yeah.
I'm talking, he was 89 years old and he was like getting on in age and everything. And he used to walk around the West End, and he died in about 3 years later, I guess when he was about 92, about 3 years ago, I think, maybe 4 years ago. And he's talking about the old days, and he says, a politician used to have to walk around I used to have to walk around here with a pocket full of silver. So if they asked me for a dime, depending on how hard a luck story they gave you, I gave them a dime, a quarter, $50, a dollar,
Yeah, there was also walking around money.
Yeah.
During the elections.
That's still here at Somerville.
That's everywhere. There's a lot of places where walking around money still exists. And you throw a few bucks out, that guy helps you bring in some more voters.
Right.
And a lot of people say, oh, isn't that awful? Of course, behind the scenes, it's much worse, because behind the scenes, you've got some real fat cats delivering all kinds of soft money to candidates in both parties.
Yeah, well,
you talk about walking around money, that's serious stuff.
I think the guys that are delivering the money are the ones that are probably the biggest threat, because those people have a tendency to get whatever they want. You have and they're dropping that kind of money off somewhere.
Well, it's a funny thing. You see these lobbyists for various special interests dropping a lot of money in somebody's campaign, and then you see that congressman or whoever is legislator turn around and never vote the way some of those special interests, not all of them, some of those special interests thought that he or she might vote. And the candidate says, look at my record. I never voted the way they wanted me to.
The thing that I was watching public television once. On public television, it was a congressman, and the congressman turns around and they passed some environmental law. He says, and the lobbyists come in, they were beating up on me, the businessmen, they were calling me up. I said, don't worry about it, don't worry about it. We passed it, but we're not going to enforce it. And this is a congressman. He's telling about his own, he's not even, it's not even embarrassing him.
This is something that a lot of people don't know about. It's one thing to pass a law, it's another thing to fund it. You gotta, if you don't fund it, if you got nobody out there doing what the law mandates you to do, you might as well not pass it. It's like these appropriations they pass in Washington and on Beacon Hill. A lot of money. It sounds good when you're reading about it, if you're interested in that particular issue. Oh, good, finally they're going to build a blue line to Beverly or whatever. And then it hasn't happened for 10.5 years, and you're wondering why. It's because they never funded it.
Or if they fund it like the Big Dig and they spend 90% of it in the first 2 years because they're afraid it may get cut.
Big Dig is a good idea, though.
Basically,
it's a good idea. Yeah, because you couldn't leave that artery up. It's a terrible thing. It was when they destroyed the West End,
I agree.
And they destroyed the New York Street section of the South End, and they destroyed part of Roxbury and other areas of the South End. They were also doing highways, and that was one of the most asinine highway projects I've ever seen.
Well, the problem with it now is that it hasn't been maintained at all. So it's going to cost them $80 billion to build under it. It's going to cost them $80 billion to make it livable, keep it straight.
You'd have to tear it down because it'll never hold the kind of traffic you need. No. It's unsightly. It's very, very unsafe. I hate driving on that. I drive on it every day, and some roads you get used to.
I try to avoid it as much as possible.
I try to avoid Massachusetts as much as possible. I'm spoiled. I went out to California to visit my daughter, and I came to a four-way stop intersection.
And people stop.
And everybody stopped. And I was getting ready to do certain hand and arm signals, shall we say, that I learned in Massachusetts. And my daughter said, "You can put your hand back in the car," she said. "We don't need to do that here. Everybody takes turns." I said, "What kind of barbarians are they out here?" No, we're very bad here in Massachusetts.
In fact, speaking, I think I told you this. There's a group called Intercac.
That's a terrible name.
I know, but
It still sounds like some laxative you buy.
CAC is Central Artery Committee, and inter means inter-neighborhood is what they're trying to do. And basically what they're trying to do is get all the different neighborhoods together and, and to be able to go to the big dig, with a little bit of weight instead of each separate neighborhood, and try to be able to move the big dig people, the Central Artery people, to quiet the noise, to, the dust or whatever. And it's a good idea, but I don't know if it's ever going to get off the ground, because I think a lot of politicians don't like to see that type of group around. It's easy to deal with neighborhood groups. And also a lot of the neighborhoods really don't, they feel like if you have an overlay, that they'll take over each neighborhood's responsibilities, and they'll end up getting shotted. And I don't think in this case that should be the case. Like I say, I don't know if it's ever going to work out. I think it's a great idea, and I go to meetings. Matter of fact, I should have been to a meeting tonight, except we're doing
I'm really sorry I kept you from Intercac.
I'm sure you are.
But it does sound like a good idea, and you're right about neighborhood jealousies. Neighborhood politics can be brutal.
Exactly.
And the jealousy and the vituperation that goes on, you did this and I should have done that and he did it. And usually in a neighborhood you've only got a few people anyway who are going to do most of the work. Those are the same people that show up on the multi-neighborhood organizations. So after a while they get worn out. The North End Waterfront Group, though, Central Artery Committee, they've had a lot of good fortune in dealing with the artery people. They've been doing pretty well, because they've been able to get the noise cut back. They've been able to get stuff done with trucks. And if that's an example of what can be done, the group you mentioned ought to follow that example.
Chinatown also has done quite a bit. They've gotten a few of the off-ramps.
Yes, they were worried about a ramp, and they've got it moved. Of course, any way you move a ramp, you're going to have problems, because the neighborhood that gets that ramp is going to say, "Wow, not me."
That's right.
There's a lot of NIMBY going on, not in my backyard, and with a highway ramp, who can blame anyone?
No, that's true. The Central Artery is going to be a problem for the next 10 years, and then I don't know if I believe that it's going to be outdated when it's done. It may be, but it'll be 100% better than what it is now.
And the key is, what are they going to do on the surface?
Right, exactly.
There was some really strange plans for a while that looked like they were going to have almost an expressway on the surface, which you do not need. That's wrong. You need some kind of movement.
8 lanes.
You don't need that. You don't need another expressway there. And you do have to knit the city together in some way. And there's got to be more green space. And that's what makes a city so livable. I mean, Boston is attractive to people partly because it has the Commonwealth Avenue Mall, it has the Common, it has the Public Garden, it has the Emerald Necklace, it has all that stuff. It has the Charles Gate. People, not Charles River Park, not Charles Gate. And people are touched by it. My wife, who grew up near Washington, every once in a while I drive her into BU in the morning usually, and before I go over to the Globe. And time and again she'll say, this really is a beautiful city. And it is.
The downtown is great. And it's strange, when I was a kid, the downtown everybody thought was rotten, and we'll say the outsides like Jamaica Plain and Rosendale and everything, where they oh, could I move to Rosendale?
Well, Jamaica, it's going on now, by the way. Jamaica Plain prices in Jamaica Plain have skyrocketed so much. A lot of the young married couples or young to middle-aged singles are moving to Rosendale now because they can't afford Jamaica Plain anymore.
And downtown was, downtown now is you gotta have tons of money to live downtown, Beacon Hill or any of those places.
Yeah, but downtown commercially needs some help, and I'm beginning to think that maybe they'll be able to pull that thing out of the fire. If they can do something in that area of what was the combat zone, that still very shabby area, if they can anchor it with something, that Lafayette place was a disaster.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, did you ever go in that building? It was like,
Twice.
it was, yeah, well, you came out alive, and I congratulate you for both times. It was a scary place to go in. It was dark. You went in circles.
Yeah,
there
not
were
just
no
that, it was a
windows.
maze.
Yeah, it was. I've never in my life seen anything quite like that. That had to be next to the government center garage, one
Right.
of the worst pieces of architecture
Yeah,
I've ever seen.
it was. I never knew where I was. In the, it was amazing.
Nobody was in those stores.
Yeah.
The poor people who were manning and womening the stores were standing in the. They looked so forlorn. I almost wanted to buy a pair of shoes just to get the guy to smile.
And I guess there was a lot of crime in there too. There were a lot of people robbing them and everything. So.
Well, I know there were a lot of kids hanging around,
Yeah,
so nobody
so-
liked that either.
yeah, nobody liked that either.
So almost anything they do there has got to be an improvement. So it shouldn't be just Newbury Street is Newbury Street. That's for the Tony, that's for the Euro
Yeah.
kids who go in and buy $8,000 suits at Armani's that my wife can probably pick up at Marshall's for about $12.50.
You don't?
Well, I know I look like I do. Yeah. I surprise a lot of people. These chinos, especially with the coffee stains on them, that's how you buy them, with the
It's a new
stains.
style now. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Only at Armani's.
You know,
though.
like what was it? The
Yeah.
dungarees, the
Yeah, I took a
stonewashed?
home equity loan to get these
Stonewashed?
chinos. What's stonewash, bud? Does anybody know what this is? Years ago, they used to wash with stones, I know. I don't think that's what
Well,
they
you
mean.
got coffee washed, you know.
Ground wash.
Ground wash.
Right. No, in terms of clothing, I've been a constant embarrassment to my family, many of whom were in the clothing business. Many of them are gone now, but some of them are still around, and they were all in the clothing business. And
Okay.
they knew clothing, and they looked at me and said, "Oh my God, what have we wrought here?"
I just want, I'm going to take a little break here for 1 minute. We're going to run, we have like, I think it's about a 40-minute clip.
40 minutes?
40 second, 40 minutes.
I'm gone.
Blah, 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 blah. we have a 40-second clip that will be running on immediately of Frank Privatera, who donated a statue of Dante Alighieri to the Dante Alighieri Society in Cambridge, and it was on WCVB. So we're just going to show that little run. Could you have that roll in, please?
The great Italian poet Dante wrote that charity is the noblest form of love. Today, a Cambridge couple who emigrated from Sicily put those words into action. Frank and Jean Privatera unveiled America's first life-size statue of Dante at the Dante Alighieri Cultural Center in Cambridge. Dante's legacy, of course, includes the Divine Comedy and the Inferno, written 700 years ago. The Dante statue was poured by the same foundry that made the FDR statue that was unveiled in Washington yesterday. The motto on the Dante statue reads, "You make a living with what you get, you make a life with what you give."
Okay.
That was a nice thing. Frank Privatera did a very nice thing.
Yeah, I would just like to correct one thing. I believe when they showed that, they said that they were Sicilian immigrants. They weren't. They were children of immigrants. And on that thing, they said that they were immigrants and they were giving back. And they are giving back, but it wasn't that they were Sicilian immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
They were children of immigrants.
Did you see Dante's face, though?
That's
He's
right.
not a happy guy.
And
You could tell from his writings.
That's
I had
right.
to read Dante.
Why isn't he a happy guy? Al?
You wouldn't be happy if you had to read that either. I had to read it in college, and I was a happy guy until I started reading Dante. No,
And where was his wife? Wasn't that another question?
I was
you had?
wondering about Mrs. Alighieri and all the little Alighieri's and whether there would be more statues. But
That's a project for the future, I think.
right, for the grandchildren of the immigrants.
That's right, exactly.
No, it's nice when people give back. I think people, when people rail against immigration and talk about how horrible it is, what they don't understand is that's what keeps the blood flowing in this country. That's what brings us to new ideas, and we shouldn't be worried about it. We should encourage it. We should glory in it.
Yeah.
And there's another example
I think
why.
most people that are worried about immigration aren't really worried about the immigrants themselves. They're worried about the problems that come along with it. And you've addressed that with Liberty's Chosen Home, if I remember right.
Yeah, and also I've written columns about it too.
We forgot to introduce Liberty's Chosen Home. Al is not just a columnist, okay, or a staff writer. Al has also written more than one book.
3 books, yeah,
And
3 books.
one of them was Liberty's Chosen Home, which I personally have read.
Which
So-
makes you about one of 3 people who've read it. Yeah, none of the 3 books ever became a made-for-television movie, we should note, to be honest. And my wife and I wrote one book together,
Yeah.
which was allegedly humorous, and we may try another one.
Yeah, that's
after
good.
many, many years of not doing
Well,
any
she's
books.
a great writer.
She's written 10 books. Her name
that
is
right?
Carol Rivers. I'm going to give her a plug.
Is this gender discrimination? She's doing more than you now.
She's
We're
doing
gonna
more
try
than
to-
me because she's smarter than I am, and she's better than I am. She left me in the dust, and she wrote 2 books at the same time last year,
Wow.
which is really difficult.
I agree. I
Yeah,
agree.
very difficult.
I don't see how she could do it. The concentration must have been
Well,
immense.
she insisted she was getting them confused and putting chapters from one into the
That's
other.
why it worked.
But yeah, I said, yeah, it makes for a better book. So,
She
yeah,
also
Liberty.
works for BU, doesn't she?
Oh, yeah, she teaches full-time at BU, teaches journalism. She's
Mm-hmm.
written a couple of scripts that have been made into afternoon TV movies for young people. They're thinking of making one of her books into a movie, and some other people are talking about another book. Of course, that's just talk right now. Hollywood likes to talk. Hollywood likes to hear itself talk. So, and my son, who's a cop, was injured on the job, has been writing on the side till he gets back to work. And the woman he married, my daughter-in-law, she's a flight attendant. She's a good writer, so she's trying a script.
Oh.
So
Looks like-
between
looks like-
somebody in this family is going, my daughter's an actress. She's making $5 every time she's in Shakespeare. If she's,
The strange thing about acting, okay, you got to love it because there's just so
yeah.
much you got to go through to. Matter of fact, we have a West End kid, Frank Storrs. He has the Actors Workshop here in Boston somewhere. I forget. It's in, I think, I don't know. I don't remember exactly what section, but he's had it here for a while, and he's been working on it. He went to New York and he came back. Matter of fact, even Leonard Nimoy. Leonard Nimoy was out of the West End, and he went out there. Everybody told me he was crazy, you know, going to his father's business, start doing haircuts. You know?
oh, sure,
Yeah.
sure. Anytime anybody goes into something like that, the general wisdom was you're out of your mind. But I've seen what my daughter and her colleagues go through in terms of just training, just the physical training. I never realized how difficult, for stage we're talking, how difficult. It's like going through basic training, some of it. And my son, who's a cop, went to one of her plays and said, gee, she's got a tough job. I said, yeah, yours is a piece of cake, right? You just run through alleys in Texas with a gun. Anybody can do that.
Well, there's a little difference, you know, I guess.
I think you have to be a little bit of an actor, even as a police officer, in order to
Without
gain
a
the
doubt.
confidence of some
Without a
people.
doubt.
And
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody, being a police officer is not exactly the job I would want nowadays. I don't know if I would have wanted in the old days.
it's always been a tough job.
Yeah, because now you have to, there are so many laws that impact you. I mean, I don't want cops to get crazy. I don't want them going around hitting people with clubs just because they think they have the authority. But on the other hand, if somebody's struggling with you and you get out of, I mean,
You've got to defend yourself, and you've got to subdue the person.
Well, not even that. Sometimes you're so hyped up that the person you're arresting is fighting with you, that you get so hyped up, you can't control yourself in that situation. There's no way of saying, well, he's hit me 5 times, I've hit him 7 times, that should be fair. You know, there's this overreaction. And that's a natural overreaction to that type of thing. As long as he doesn't take his gun out and blow his brains all over the street, I think you have to give him a little bit of leeway. I'm not saying